Having an abandonment wound is much more common than you think. And abandonment comes in so many different forms. And I only had this realization in the last few years. So I was physically abandoned by my dad. My dad, from a really young age, went and lived in a different country until I was about 12. And so that's an obvious abandonment wound, like you've physically been abandoned by a parent. But abandonment can come in so many different forms, and another form of abandonment is emotional abandonment, where emotionally one or both of your parents weren't there for you. You know, you were emotionally neglected. That is a form of abandonment. And I was listening to this podcast a couple years ago. It was about the abandonment wound. As I was listening to it, I had this realization, like I had all these epiphanies going off, and I was like, holy shit, I've got multiple abandonment wounds. I was like, no wonder I've got this issue. But I had no idea. So we're going to talk a bit about the abandonment wound in this video so we can have a better understanding, because like I said, it's a lot more common than you think. And I think there are a lot of people that have an abandonment wound, but they don't actually realize it. And so we're going to talk a bit about that and then talk about how to heal it. So I've been through that process of healing the abandonment wound. And so firstly, I'm going to share some examples of abandonment. These are just a few examples. There's many more. But examples could be like separation at birth, divorced parents, a sick parent or the death of the parent, not being picked up from school, child abuse, emotionally unavailable parents. And there's many more other forms. This is just to give you a bit of an idea, right? And so for me, when I was listening to that podcast and I had these epiphanies going off, I had the realization that like my mum had emotionally abandoned me and my dad had physically and emotionally abandoned me. But then also I remembered when I was a kid, and you know how kids can play up sometimes, being like a little bit naughty. I just remember like my mum would threaten to send me to my father's to live off in a different country sort of thing. And so it's like I was being threatened to be abandoned because of my behavior. And so that's another form of an abandonment wound. I was also kicked out of home in my late teens. And the reason I got kicked out of home was basically I had this anger and this attitude, but the reason I had the anger and the attitude was because of the trauma I went through as a kid and like the abandonment issues that I developed, which was kind of goes back to the parenting I had, right? And so I developed this attitude and anger because of all that stuff, and then I ended up being kicked out of home, kicked out to the street. So again, that's another form of abandonment. And I realized like, oh my God, I've got, all these different abandonment wounds. And then I also had this memory from when I was 2 years old, man. I was like, this is really weird for me as a 2-year-old to think like this. So what happened is I was in bed sleeping, as we do, and then I was kind of like, in a way, rudely woken up in the middle of the night. All I remember, like I'm a 2-year-old child, all I remember is getting like woken up, wrapped up in a blanket. The first thought I had was that there was a fire in the house, because it just seemed like a really strange situation and everything, And then my mum had me wrapped up in a blanket, took me out of the house, put me in the car, went back in the house, and as I was sitting in the car, I realized everyone else was in the bed sleeping, like my brother and my stepdad, and all the lights were off. It was still sort of like dark, and it was just me sitting in the car by myself. My mum had gone back inside, and I realized there wasn't a fire. So my next thought was, I literally thought I was going to be driven off to the woods to be abandoned. And I remember that clear as day, like it was yesterday. But I thought that's really strange for someone that's, I'm only 2 years old and I'm already thinking like that, thinking I'm going to be abandoned. So a lot of us do have these wounds and we don't realize it. And some of the side effects of the abandonment wound can be things like this: codependency, trust issues, anger issues, low self-esteem, anxiety disorders, staying in abusive relationships, and people pleasing. So these are just some of the side effects, and you may have these sorts of issues, but you may not actually realize where it stems from. You may not realize you have an abandonment wound, and that's where it's coming from. And with the people pleasing, so I was the people pleaser type, right? Which is linked to the abandonment wound. Generally with the abandonment wound, you end up going one of two ways. You either become a narcissist or you become an empath. And the empaths are the one that becomes the people pleasers. And so, when we're kids, something happens in childhood that causes us to not feel safe. And so because we don't feel safe, we start tuning into everyone around us. And we start thinking, like if everyone around me is happy, then I'm safe. If everyone else is good, I'm good, right? And that's where the people pleasing comes from. We also people please because we try to do things for others. We try to please others in the hopes that we get love, validation, and approval back. So if you're the people pleaser type, firstly, there's a good chance that that's going to be linked to an abandonment wound. And secondly, you have to realize that you need to let go of that people-pleasing mentality because it doesn't serve you. It only causes you to, be taken advantage of, taken for granted. You end up having your energy drained by others. You can even develop resentment because you could be doing all this nice things for others and then you feel like you're not getting it back. And so that can cause you to feel resentment. And so one of the things with shedding people pleasing is firstly realizing it's linked to this abandonment wound, like where it actually stems from. Because people pleasing can also stem from parent pleasing. Like when you're a kid, you're having to act a certain way to get attention or love or validation or approval from a parent. And so you try to please your parent, and then that can turn into people pleasing as you get older and you're out in the world with other people. So we have to learn to shed that, and one of the ways to shed it is to learn to become your own source of love, validation, and approval. And we'll talk a little more about that later in the video. Now, with the abandonment wound, we may develop some shame, right? And the shame can cause us to form beliefs. We may have certain beliefs like, I'm broken, there's something wrong with me, my feelings don't matter, I'm not lovable, I'm only lovable if I behave a certain way. And that's just an example of, some of the beliefs we can form from the abandonment wound and from the shame that we feel that's associated to that abandonment wound. And realize these are just stories. Beliefs and stories are the same thing, but your beliefs create reality. And if you have these beliefs, within you, in your subconscious mind, that's going to be creating your reality. You're going to experience situations that's going to reflect these beliefs back to you. So we need to learn how to become mindful. We need to learn to become aware of what beliefs or stories we have, and we need to learn to let them go, realizing that they don't serve us, and let them go. And we can learn to let them go as we, heal this abandonment wound, because that's what we want to do. We want to heal the wound so we don't have the wound anymore. And so it can be a little bit of a process to go through to get to that better place, right? And so I've been through the process myself, and I've noticed this shift within me, within my being because of it. So this is why I want to encourage other people to take a look at themselves. Do I have an abandonment wound? When it comes to like inner work and healing, we have to go back to our childhood because that's where it all comes from. So we have to think, what was my childhood like? Was I abandoned? Were my parents emotionally available? Things like this. Now, with my abandonment wound, what happens is like we have patterns that play out, right? Like energy patterns. And so I would be attracting men in, like in a relationship, that would reflect the relationship I had with my dad. So for example, I would attract men that were narcissistic, that would abandon me in a time of need and were emotionally unavailable. And so that is is the same energy dynamic that I had with my dad. So a lot of our relationships we attract in is basically linked to our relationship with our parents. And so again, if you want to stop attracting in, like let's say you're like me and you're attracting in these emotionally unavailable narcissists, if we want to stop attracting these people in, that's why we have to do this work and heal this wound so we can let this, like basically shed it out of our being. And when we do that, we will stop attracting these people in because the energy won't be there anymore. Now, another thing I wanted to point out as well is that these patterns can play out as in patterns being passed down. So I had the realization that, yes, I have abandonment wounds, but then I realized so do both my parents. My dad has abandonment wounds. My mum has abandonment wounds. I don't know much about my grandparents. Actually, my dad's dad, he'll have an abandonment wound because I know he had a really bad childhood. But my mum's parents, I don't know much about what their childhood was like. But these patterns can be passed down, these abandonment wound patterns. And in a way, it's just like a learnt behavior. We don't really know any better. We don't know any different. And so realize, like, even if your parents abandoned you, they didn't know any better. You know, they do their best from their level of consciousness. And so I've gone through the whole process of forgiving my parents as well, and I've let it all go, and we get along good. And one of the things that helped me let it all go was also realizing that that situation actually served me, because what I went through as a kid is what led me to having a spiritual awakening. And you can't have a spiritual awakening from a really good life that's like rainbows and unicorns. It normally comes from pain and suffering. So it's like I'm grateful to have the awakening, and I wouldn't have had the awakening without experiencing this. So realize that you may have an abandonment wound because it's quite common. Your parents may also have an abandonment wound, and it's not their fault. It's not their fault, and it's not your fault. You know what I mean? It's no one's fault. It just is what it is. So how do we heal this wound? The first thing we do is we have to... Sorry, my cat's just... You're right over there, girl. She's making a bit of noise. The first thing we have to do is acknowledge we have the wound. Acknowledging the problem in the first place, like being able to say, yes, I have this wound, is always going to be the first step. So now we know we have an abandonment wound. Like when I was listening to that podcast and I had all these epiphanies. You right there, girl? Sorry, my cat's just come in to say hi. We have all these epiphanies. Oh, I got my mic on. Just didn't want to cover it up. You right? Hello. Yeah, so when I was listening to the Abandonment Wound podcast, that's when I realized, became aware that I had multiple abandonment wounds. Like, and I was like, no wonder I'm like this, right? Now, the second step is feeling is healing. So what I mean by this is that whatever abandonment issues you have, it's going to make you feel a certain way, right? Especially if we revisit our childhood and start doing some digging. So when I say feeling is healing, whatever feelings or emotions come up, allow yourself to feel them. Don't block them out. Don't try to stuff them back down. Don't try to distract yourself from them. Allow yourself to just feel whatever's coming up, because feeling is healing. Feeling is how you let it all go. So if you're digging into your abandonment wound, just allow yourself to just feel the emotions, whatever it may be. Just sit with them, and then that's how we can process them and release them. The third step is you have to let go of the fear of being alone or the fear of being abandoned. Because the abandonment wound, like, again, it has these side effects, all sorts of side effects, right? And one of those side effects can be, a fear of being alone or a fear of being abandoned by someone. This could be someone you're in a relationship with, and you just have this fear that one day they're going to up and leave. And I had that same fear. It's been built in me for like most of my life, and it's been on autopilot. And it was actually last year I ended up attracting in another narcissist that I've attracted in a couple of narcissists, but last year I attracted in another narcissist that was very similar to the narcissist I was with beforehand, as in it was a similar energy, different face, but similar energy, similar type behavior. You know, he abandoned me in a time of need. I injured myself pretty bad, and I actually needed like help and support because I couldn't sit, I couldn't walk, I couldn't do basic things for myself, and he dumped me because of the injury. So he abandoned me in a time of need, and he was emotionally unavailable as well. Like when I was there and really needed that support, he wasn't there. In fact, he was actually behind my back off chatting up to another chick. And that was kind of disappointing because I was friends with this person for 5 years and never thought that they would be like this. But I'm grateful that I got to see them for who they truly are. I got to see their true colors. And so there's always a positive and a negative situation, right? And that situation caused me to realize I hadn't healed my abandonment wound like I thought I did. I thought I had already dealt with it, but when I attracted in another narcissist, because I attract the narcissist because I'm the empath, and both the narcissist and the empath have the abandonment wound. It's just an opposites attract. And I thought, why am I attracting another narcissist? And then I realized, oh, I haven't healed my abandonment wound. That's why I'm still attracting them. So that's the positive in that negative situation, was it made me realize I needed to take another look at my abandonment wound. So when I did that, that's when I realized I need to let go of that fear of being alone or the fear of being abandoned. And you have to learn to be okay on your own. Like, you don't need people. Like, get comfortable with just hanging out by yourself in your own company and not needing other people. You know what I mean? When you get into that place where you don't need to be surrounded by friends or people, you can enjoy your own company, you can chill on your own and you're happy, that is a really good place to be, because you're not needing people, you're not relying on them, you're not codependent. You know what I mean? So work on that fear of being alone or fear of being abandoned. Let go of it. Once you've let go of that and that you don't have that fear anymore, it'll shift your energy. And the way the laws of the universe work, you know, law of vibration, law of attraction, pretty much what your energy is what you're going to attract in. So when you shift your energy, this is when you start attracting different things into your reality. So this is why it's a really good idea to do this sort of work and let go of these fears that we may have, or healing these wounds that we may have. Now, the fourth thing to do is to stop abandoning yourself. So people with abandonment wounds have a tendency to abandon ourselves. And again, this can be linked to the people pleasing. So for example, let's say you woke up today, you had plans to do some artwork. Let's say you like art and you're like, okay, I'm going to do a really cool painting today. I'm so excited. And then a friend calls you up and the friend's like, hey, I've got a problem going on. Can you help me? I could really do with your help. A lot of the times, people with abandonment wounds will people please and we'll go, yeah, we'll come help you. And then we just completely abandon ourselves. We abandoned our plans that we had for the day. Like, you know, you wanted to do that artwork, but I'm going to go help my friend. So I'm abandoning myself to, you know, help. And we have to, I'm not saying you can't help people. I just feel like I need to point that out, because it's like, you'll be like, but what if I want to be able to help my friends? I'm not saying that you can't help people. What it's really about is, why are you helping people? What's the actual reason you're helping people? Are you helping because you want their love, validation, and approval? Are you helping because you're people pleasing? Do you know what I mean? I would recommend helping people if they're going to help you out. If you have friends that have your back when you need it, then obviously you help them out. But at the same time, you've still got to learn not to abandon yourself, because we always, as people with abandonment wounds and the people-pleasing mentality, we're always abandoning ourselves. You know what I mean? And so we need to stop doing that. Stop abandoning the self. Because sometimes it can sound selfish, but that's the thing with like the narcissist and the empath. The narcissists are too selfish. The empath's not selfish enough. And it's about both sides becoming balanced in the middle. So it's like the empath has to learn to be a little bit selfish. And then the narcissist has to learn to be more compassionate and empathetic towards other people. And so it's really important, again, to stop abandoning the self. Even if it sounds selfish, it's not. We have to be selfish sometimes. And number 5 is linked back to what I was saying about the people pleasing. We have to learn to become our own source of love, validation, and approval. Because as the people pleaser type, we go out of our way to do nice things for everyone else. And again, we're always abandoning ourselves. We put all ourselves and our needs, or whatever we want to be doing, at the back, and we're all about everyone else. And so when you're people pleasing, you're pleasing others, you're doing it in the hopes that they're going to give you the love, validation, and approval. When you become your own source for love, validation, and approval, you don't need people. You don't need to please people, because you don't need to get it from them, because you're giving it to yourself. So it puts you in a powerful position. So you don't want to please people, but it's more about, if you wanted to help someone, you've got a friend that needs some help, you just ask yourself, what do I want, need, or feel? Do I want to help this person? Do I feel like going over there and helping them? What do I want? Again, it's not selfish. It sounds selfish, but it's not. And so just learn to become your own source of love, validation, and approval, because that puts you in a powerful position where you can choose to help people, not based off getting love, validation, and approval from them, just because you do it just based off because you want to, not because you have to, because you're getting something in return. You know what I mean? And then number 6 is to let go of these beliefs and stories that don't serve. We may have to first become mindful because of these stories, because they can be in the autopilot mind, in the subconscious mind. So if they're in the subconscious, we're not aware. If we're not aware, we can't change anything. So we have to become aware of what stories we tell ourselves. And you can just do that through observing your thought patterns through meditation. And as you observe your thought patterns, you'll start observing what stories you're telling yourself. And then once you become aware, you can make the choice to let them go, realize they don't serve me, and we can wire in a new and better beliefs or stories. And another thing I'll add with that is also practicing positive self-talk. With having abandonment wounds, or any sort of wounds or childhood trauma, it's really easy for us to have negative self-talk and to be telling ourselves, just negative things. So it's really a good idea to to practice positive self-talk on a daily basis. And that'll help also with reprogramming these new and better beliefs that will serve us. So I hope you like this video, guys. If you got some sort of value out of it, let me know by smashing that like button or write a comment. And if you like this sort of content, subscribe and hit that bell notification. I hope you have an awesome day.